All right, we're gathered together this afternoon to continue to study our subject of prayer. We've been using Proverbs chapter 3 and verses 5 and 6 for our text. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not to thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. We never really thought of this verse as completely like I do now. Not that I'm saying I have complete understanding of it now, but what stands out to me now hasn't stood out to me before, and that is its relevance in our prayer life. Because we can be prone to lean on our own understanding, and that continues to have a lot of bearing on our thoughts for this afternoon as we continue our study on the subject of prayer. We recognize that prayer is fellowship with God. We recognize that it's a human, a mortal, a flawed individual, yet based on the finished work of Christ, he has the ability to come before the throne and to seek direction, and to seek help, and to seek strength. We have the ability to seek help and find help in the time of need. We have the ability to not lean on our own understanding, but begin to acknowledge him more and more, and have him to direct our paths as to the way he would have us to go. We've noticed that as we've studied the men in the scriptures that we've looked at Elijah, and we looked at Daniel, and we looked at Paul, and sometimes the answers that God gives them don't always, on the surface, make the first amount of sense, the most amount of sense. It's not what you'd first think of, sometimes. But he says, I direct you to go this way. I direct you to go that way. When our human reasoning would say maybe something different sometimes. We looked at Paul's focus of prayer. And we noticed that his focus of prayer is uniquely related to the glory of God. There is no doubt a place to pray for the various physical needs of people and those kinds of things. Loved ones in the hospital, loved ones in the path of storms that we've mentioned today, and just those opportunities to pray for one another in those practical ways. That's there. But what you see in Paul's praying is that it's vastly prioritized in that which will spiritually benefit that person, and when that person is spiritually benefited, then God is honored. That his prayers are focused with a heavy priority to what brings God honor, what brings God glory. And in our prayer lives, I think that same priority needs to be there. We may pray for the sick relatives, the people in the hospital, the people this, that, and the other thing, but the priority still ought to be, and the emphasis still ought to be, for our spiritual good, for their spiritual good, for God's honor and glory, and praying for one another in those areas. We looked at more recently in Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6. And in Luke's account of this, they asked the Lord to teach us to pray. And in Luke's account, then it goes right into saying, when you pray, Our Father, which art in heaven, so on. In Matthew's account, in chapter 6, where we find this parallel passage, we notice from verses 7, from starting in verse 5, not 7, but 5. But when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues, in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut the door, pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which is in secret shall reward thee openly. But when you pray, use not vain repetitions as the heathen, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. Be not ye therefore like unto them, for your Father knoweth what things you have need of before you ask him. And verse 8 hits on a point that we've looked at. He knows what you need before you ask. He knows better what the need is before you even ask. But we are required, we are expected to continue to seek him, to continue to seek his direction, to seek his guidance. We are to continue to go before him, asking, seeking, searching. We saw Daniel, we saw Elijah, knowing what God was going to have them do, knowing what God ultimately was going to do in their situations respectively, yet they still went to him, seeking to be used in that, seeking to be more fully understanding and aware of what God's doing. And especially in Daniel's case, I think it was that, and it might have been Elijah, that at that moment when you inquired, that's when one was sent to explain, to give more understanding. I believe that was Daniel. And so we recognize we're not telling God anything he doesn't know, but we're required to go to him in prayer. So he's answering the question, according to Luke, picking it up in verse 9. After this manner, therefore, pray ye. And that's where we've been the last few weeks. After this manner, in this style. Now, even in our text here in verse 7, not to just repeat this blindly, but after this manner, and he starts with our Father, and that's where we looked 2 weeks ago. Our Father, which is a realization of who he is, a realization that he's the giver of life, with a realization that as we looked at that week, that he knows best. He really does know best. He's our Father. With the realization, I'm responsible to him. With the realization, he has authority over me. Our Father. And all that relationship reminds an individual of, and that puts us in a better mindset, a better frame of mind as we begin to go to the Lord in prayer. I'm not going to a buddy, and that's really going to be in this message. I'm not going to an equal. I'm not going to someone and say, hey, dude, I want this. The Lord's reminding us in this instructive model, recognize that he is our Father, who he is, which art in heaven. That's where he is. That's above us. His vantage point is clearer. He sees above all of the other details. His ways are above our ways. His thoughts are above our thoughts. His abilities are above our abilities. His knowledge is above ours. And so he puts us in that frame of mind as he begins to start this model. Our Father, which art in heaven. That's what we looked at last week. Hallowed be thy name. Now this is the position of God in our hearts. Or it may be, and it may have some relevance to consider it this way, not only a position of God in our hearts, but a request upon our hearts as we go to the Lord in prayer. seeking His name to be above every name, seeking in our own estimation, seeking for His name to be promoted amongst the inhabitants of the world, that His name be hallowed, that His name be holy. So we had dealt with who we're addressing, we had dealt with where He is seated, and now more of what He is. Holy, separate, unique God. That there's, not that He's just above us, that He's so far above us there's nobody like Him. That He's so unique that He has no rival. That His knowledge has no rival. That His ability has no rival. His position has no rival. And as we begin to put all of this together, we're not to lean on our own understanding. We're to acknowledge, in all our ways, acknowledge Him. And He'll direct our paths. So we begin to, okay, I need to pray. Who am I praying to? My Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. Why is it hallowed? Why is it holy? Why is it separate? Why is it unique? Because there's none like unto Him. He's separate from all Himself. Think about His names. Study the names and titles and attributes of God. And entire volumes of books have been written to distinguish His names. There's several good ones, and even between the good ones, the ones that I think are good ones, one will have more than the other, and there's so many different names, and each one describes an aspect of His being. Each one describes a component of an attribute that we might see who God is. Because God is so multifaceted and complex that we have to compartmentalize it into small little bites so we can begin to try to grasp His character, His attributes, His abilities. And remember, the Lord's not saying this, nor are we trying to promote this idea. We don't make Him God because we call Him God. We don't make Him God because we say so. That's how pop culture makes icons. Somebody comes along with the ability to do something, or somebody comes along with a song, or somebody can act, or somebody can figure out how to make money, and we can put them up on a pedestal, and they can get more followers and likes than anybody else, and we, the community, the pop culture, begins to acknowledge that, and you put this person up on a pedestal and you set them all apart, and to a great extent the pop culture has made that person who they are by following and liking and whatever all they do. God is God. We don't make Him God. We acknowledge His authority. We acknowledge His uniqueness. We acknowledge His supremacy over us. We acknowledge who He is. It's my Father. I derive life from Him. I derive life from Him, and when He says that's it, then that's it. Job talks about those boundaries of days that men cannot pass. He's my Father. And He's seated in heaven. He has all authority. And I recognize from this text, He is unique, hallowed, holy. And His name represents, in verse 9, hallowed be Thy name. And there's so much about that, and we try to draw your attention to that His name has to do with the sum total of his reputation, the sum total of all of his attributes, begin to identify that name of God. So he's not simply a Father that's above me. He's not simply one like no other. He's God that we're going to in prayer. Parallel this with Isaiah 57. Isaiah 57 in verse 15. Isaiah 57 and verse 15. For thus saith the high and lofty one. Thus saith the high and lofty one, that inhabiteth eternity. Always was, always will be, always existed, always will. Always was supreme, always will be supreme. Whose name is holy. There's none like unto God. I dwell in the high and holy place. Notice this. With him also that is of a contrite and humble spirit. To revive the spirit of the humble, to revive the heart of the contrite ones. And acknowledging, like the Lord has directed in our text in Matthew 6 and Luke's text, Luke 11, when he starts out with the same basic model and the same basic instructions. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. If you ponder that, if you allow that to begin to affect you, what is a child, especially one that gets a little older, and they want something? And they can go to mom or they can go to dad, and they can say, I want this. I want you to do that, whatever. And what's one of the things that will get under a parent's skin as fast as anything? As that child comes and makes a request that's more like a demand. I want you to do this. And the parent might recoil a little bit and say, excuse me? And it would be met with an altogether different reaction, with respect and humility. You think it's possible that maybe we could do this, or you could help me with this, or whatever the thing is. But it's entirely approach. It's entirely attitude. It's entirely that respect component, either there or missing, makes the world a difference. Isn't that what, in part, the Lord is saying to us as we come to Him? Remember who I am. Remember where I am. I'm your Father. I'm above you in heaven. And remember what I am. I'm God. My name is holy. There's none like unto me. He's the high and lofty one, the one that inhabiteth eternity, the one whose name is holy, the one who dwells in a high and holy place. But then this, with the humble, with him also that is contrite and humble spirit. Isn't that what the Lord is really getting at in our text in Matthew 6? He's separate. He's holy. He's above in every possible category. No one can rival His power, His glory, His majesty. He's separate in reigning ability. He's separate in authority. And He'll never be overthrown. I don't know why. An old actor, I don't even think he's living anymore, used to have a commercial. I think it was for a battery. And he put it on his shoulder there and said, "Go ahead. Try to knock." Jerry remembers it. "Go ahead. Try to knock it off." Well, sooner or later, somebody's gonna. You put that kind of invitation out there, and sooner or later, somebody's going to, in the human realm. Not with God. Separate, and will never be overthrown. Separate in royalty, and supremacy, and will never be surpassed. His name, which is the sum total of all of His attributes, sum total of His reputation, His name will never be surpassed. And this is the one before whom we are going. This is the one before whom we are making our petitions known. Isn't the Lord saying, let's come with humble regard, in reverence? Think about the name of God and the uniqueness of the name of God. Think about how that we are reminded not to take His name in vain, not to toss His name around lightly. And taking His name in vain is a whole lot more than just using it in front of other curse words or with other curse words. But to lightly throw it around like it means nothing more than any other word in my vocabulary. And we're not to do that. His name is to be set apart. When one has a proper reverence for His name, they're careful about how they speak. The scribe was careful how he wrote it. I've read where the scribes, as they were writing the scriptures, would lay the common pen down and pick up a special one for writing the name of God. I think they would wash their hands, pick up the special one, write the name of God, lay it back down, and continue on. They wouldn't even write the name of God in the scriptures with the same writing utensil that the rest of the common words were used. I don't know that to be a fact. I've read that, and I trust that those sources are reasonable. But the name of God is to be held in high reverence in our minds. We can never, I don't think, overestimate the necessity of elevating His name. And we can never, I don't think, over-emphasize the need for us to go before Him that is holy, going humbly, going with the proper attitude. Because His being holy, being above, reminds us not to lean on our own understanding, takes us right back to our text verse in Proverbs. And in all our ways acknowledge Him, and He'll direct our paths. I'm reminded of a time, and I thought of it reading the letter that we read from our missionary, that I'm reminded of a time in Acts 16 where Paul and company had endeavored to go in a certain direction, and the Spirit of God said no. He's on a missionary journey, and they endeavored to go to a certain place, and the Spirit of God said no. No, that's not the place. I want you to go. And Paul said, the Spirit suffered us not. And so we decided to go this way, and the Spirit suffered them not. Who knows? Maybe Paul's operating on the information that, hey, I've heard that there's some believers in that area. Or the other way, I've heard that nobody's ever been to this area with the gospel, and Paul gets it in his mind. That's the place I want to take the gospel. There's never been a preacher over there. Let's get over there. Or there's people over there. Let's get over there. And the Spirit of God said, no, I got something else planned. They're leaning on their own understanding with good intentions and God's glory in mind. And the Spirit of God says, no, that's not the direction I'm taking you. You read that text, and the Spirit of God sends them this way. Because God is our Father, which is in heaven, and His name is holy. His name is unique. He's doing all things right and good and perfect. The timing wasn't right to go there. The timing wasn't right to go over there. Paul may have never found out why. He only knew that he was supposed to go that way. And so, this is an acknowledgement of who God is. And when you get to that point, then you have to acknowledge who I am, who you are. I'm the one instructed not to lean on my own understanding. I'm the one that can see nothing of tomorrow. I'm the one that cannot know big picture what God's doing in this situation. I'm the one that I can make all the right decisions based on all the current data, but God may have a different plan for an entirely different outcome, and I may make all the decisions based on what's going to benefit me the most, and that may not be God's plan. It's not the Lord may be saying, that's not my thought to have this benefit you the most, because of my reasons. I want you to have this outcome. And you say, well, that's not the best outcome. Yeah, that might be. That might be, in our estimation, not the best outcome. Wasn't the best outcome for Paul, in Paul's mind, to have the thorn in the flesh stay there. He besought the Lord 3 times, get rid of this thing for me. I could do so much better without it. And the Lord said, no. I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to strengthen you. I'm not getting rid of it. Well, that's not the best outcome. It is in God's mind. And He's the one above who is holy. So then we address Him in the highest regard. We address Him with the most respect. We address Him with the most humility. We don't throw His name around flippantly or casually. We don't enter into His presence flippantly or casually. You kind of can tell how much I was going to say how much respect somebody has. You can tell the relationship of some people when you walk into a room, and especially if it's a bunch of guys. I don't know if ladies do this like guys do, but you get a bunch of guys in the same room and the witless banter can abound. And everybody can be talking all at the same time. Nobody says a thing that matters. And especially if you're a lady looking on, you say, none of that means anything. And you can walk in a room and, sup, hey, dude, what's happening? You don't walk in, or you don't enter into the presence of God and say, sup, hey, dude. You walk into maybe your buddies that way. Your equals may be that way, right? But when you grapple with what the Lord's telling us in Matthew 6 and Luke 11, when you grapple with the one that we're going into his presence is the high and lofty one, you take someone close to the Lord with a right reverence for the Lord. You watch when they start their prayer. They'll do so with consideration and respect. And they won't just thrust themselves into the presence of God. Hey, I'm here, give me what I want. But they'll begin to address him. However they do go about that, our gracious Heavenly Father. And they begin to move themselves in their mind's eye into the presence of the Almighty One, whose name is holy. And you don't hear any of the things that you would hear amongst a bunch of guys. You begin to hear, thou art the high and lofty one. And you've allowed me into your presence based on the merit of Christ. And in the merit of Christ, I come into your presence. Not worthy on my own. And I come into your presence acknowledging you're my Father. And you're in heaven. And you're the Holy One. Now that, if that gets hold of you, when you begin to pray, it won't be just words. It won't be just something you've memorized. It'll cause you to reflect and be very specific. It'll cause you to yield yourself in humble reverence. And you know what else that'll cause? I'm convinced it'll cause an individual to do more listening and less talking. Lord, what wilt thou have me do? And seek for answers. Lord, I've got this situation and you are the high and lofty one. What do I do? And you do your level best to yield yourself to answers. Look at Isaiah 29. Isaiah 29. And verse 23. But when he seeth his children, the work of mine hands, in the midst of them, they shall sanctify my name, and sanctify the Holy One of Jacob, and shall fear the God of Israel. There will be a humbling that's healthy. There will be a reverential awe that's healthy. There will be a yielding, a seeking that is in conjunction with yielding, not my will but thine, because you know best. I believe it would have a tremendously profound effect on our prayer lives. Just taking these and putting them together. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Not to repeat those words, not to just say them verbatim, but to let soak in what those words represent? And how it can be seen as a position of God in our estimation when we reverence Him in that way. And again, don't forget that it can be, I think, also seen as a request, these words in Matthew 6, can be seen as a request. I want that, your name to be reverend and hallowed, sanctified. I pray that catch on widespread. It can be seen as a request as well. But doesn't it put us in a place of going before the Lord very, very humbly, carefully, in a yielded manner? And I think that's healthy. And it would seem to me that's why the Lord presented that model when asking, teach us to pray. And that's where He started. We'll continue, Lord willing, in the next few services to continue that model and see where it takes us. Let's stand.